George Burns switching identities with his young grandson in 18 Again. Sean Penn and Robert Duvall are L.A. cops fighting violent street gangs in Colors. And martial arts master Steven Seagal stars in the action thriller Above the Law. It's all coming up next on Siskel and Ebert.
Hey, let me do the tap dance in your head. Shut up.
This friggin' guy. What's the matter? I'm too old for your crap.
Sean Penn and Robert Duvall are gang crime unit cops trying to combat the rampant gang violence in Los Angeles in Colors. One of 4 new films we'll be reviewing this week. And coming up at the end of this show, we'll also take a look at one of the stars from Colors, in depth, Sean Penn, his controversial career. I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. Our first movie this week is Colors, and it's an ambitious police movie starring Robert Duvall as a streetwise veteran Los Angeles police officer assigned to the gang unit, and Sean Penn as the hot-headed young officer who becomes his partner. Duvall is a realist. He knows how things work on the street. He knows how to cultivate contacts, and he knows what to observe and what to ignore when he's out there. Penn has a more confrontational approach. He believes in wading in and knocking heads, and so the cops are fighting with each other almost from the moment they become partners.
You think I'm over the hill? You want a friggin' piece of me? Right now? Huh? You think you got the market cornered? You think I'm not friggin' crazy? Go ahead, try me. Try me, you jerk.
It takes a street emergency to suggest to Penn that Duvall may actually know his way around the city streets.
Ain't the one about to shoot!
Eventually, the relationship between the two men finds a common ground, although in this scene, they're still ready to part company.
Listen, I spoke to Melendez at DSD, okay? I'll be getting a new partner first of the month. You ever have a bad relationship with a woman where you fight all the time, like, constantly? Even when you love her. It's like having 2 heads. One says red, the other should have said green. But once you had one that wasn't like that, you never go back again. If you see it's like that, you leave it. You don't point a finger and blame someone. You just go your separate ways.
And in a way, their relationship is a bit like a marriage, because as they fight, they learn things about each other. They don't learn more by communicating, they learn more by not communicating. The relationship between Penn and Duvall is the best thing in this movie, and they're both very good at taking somewhat conventional characters we've seen from other movies, and making them into particular people in this one. But what's interesting about the movie is the way Dennis Hopper, the director, places those 2 cops in the middle of several larger stories. The gang members are not simply targets in Colors. We learn a lot about them, and we begin to understand some of the things that are important to them, including the camaraderie and even the sense of family that they find in a gang and nowhere else. There's a scene where they try to explain that to the cops. It's very effective. The movie has a lot of action in it, but it's also surprisingly ambitious in showing the whole world of police operate in, and not just a kind of them and us situation.
Yeah, you know, you said the most interesting thing was the relationship between the 2 cops. I actually found the most interesting thing was the gangs.
Yeah.
I was overwhelmed by this. I spent a year living in Los Angeles. I mean, I live in the city of Chicago, as do you. We know there are gang problems in every major city. I have not seen a film that brought home the enormity of the problem, the size of the gangs, the hopelessness of the police in attempting to combat them, that like this film does. There's been a lot of controversy based on a lot of ignorance of some people saying that this film is showing cops being brutal. To me, what this is showing is cops having virtually no chance to combat this whole secret society that just overwhelms them. To me, the film was a revelation.
I agree with what you say. What's interesting, too, though, is the fact that the way Duvall understands the way that the gangs operate as part of a social structure. It's sad, but it's true, and this movie, by going inside a gang, shows that it's true, that for many of these kids, they're not just ganging together to shoot people and make money. They're ganging together really to have a place to belong and a code that they can subscribe to in an anarchic society. Well, so that aspect is interesting.
There also are a whole bunch that are in there for the money, for the drugs, and for having a good time. Our next film, a good violent time. Our next film is called 18 Again, and it probably will draw some viewers hoping to recapture the pleasure of seeing George Burns in the Oh God movies. Unfortunately, there is very little to be seen of George Burns in 18 Again, which turns out to be yet another comedy about an older man and a young boy trading places and gaining new insights into each other. Well, that's not fresh anymore, and we could see it all coming when Burns, playing an 81-year-old grandfather, sings at his birthday party about his lost youth as his 18-year-old grandson looks on.
I wish I was 18 again, going where I've never been. But old folks and old oaks standing tall just pretend I wish I was 18 again.
Their spirits are inexplicably transferred in a car accident, and suddenly we're stuck watching the boy in college, listening to his history professor. But the kid has the mind and memories of George Burns. He challenges the professor's statement that Harry S. Truman didn't have a middle name.
Well, what does the S stand for, Mr. Watson?
Sergei, from an East European uncle. But foreseeing the Russian troubles that would follow after World War II, Harry made up that hogwash about the S.
And where did you come by this information?
From the man himself.
Yeah.
Harry told you?
Not too funny. As with most of these movies, there's a pathetic comedy sex scene. This one involves buxom Anita Morris as Burns's mistress coming on to the 18-year-old boy. Tired stuff here.
Well, you see, Madeline, I've gone through some very strange changes recently.
That happens at your age.
Oh, that's not what I mean.
I know how you feel.
You know what it feels like to be inside another person's body?
Do you?
There's nothing fresh, and of course the great disappointment is how the producers try to cover George Burns' absence from the film. We hear his voice almost as much as we see him, and whereas there was some amusing reasoning behind the casting of him as God, well, here he's just another perky old man.
Yeah, and he's not really doing anything new in this film. The people who wrote the film seem to have borrowed it from his nightclub act. For example, he uses that line, I date younger women. I date women my age, but there are no women my age.
I know.
Well, we've heard that a million times. You don't expect the character to say it.
Right.
That's George Burns' line. Right. What we have here is the latest entry in a sweepstakes. You've got Like Father, Like Son, Vice Versa, 18 Again, and Waiting in the Wings is big. All four movies with the same identity transfer theme. One of them is a great movie, Vice Versa. It's still in theaters. The other two that we've seen so far, neither one of us like.
Yeah, it was sad to see Burns just sort of walked through the picture. It was almost as if somebody was strolling him through the film. When we come back, a thriller called Above the Law with Steven Seagal playing a Chicago cop investigating the CIA and drug money.
No, mister!
It's the story of two Chicago police detectives who stumble across a big drug ring and then bust it and then are mysteriously pulled off the case by their department acting under instructions of the FBI, of all people. But these are stubborn cops, and they continue their investigation until they discover that a corrupt CIA official is actually behind the drug smuggling. The movie stars a newcomer named Steven Seagal, a martial arts expert who's being promoted by Warner Brothers as their big new action star. Well, he does a lot of his own stunts all right, like this one. His police partner is played by Pam Grier, herself an action star from the 1970s, who has her best role in a long time.
Excuse me, but I just had to stop and tell you that you look like the sun setting on the waterfall in springtime, baby.
And you got 5 seconds. 3 are up.
Say, you ain't got to be like, hey, You know, like lady cops need boyfriends too, you dig? But you have a nice day just the same.
The movie sets its violence in a lot of offbeat locations, including a grocery store.
Get down.
And a parking garage. Above the Law was co-written and directed by Andrew Davis, who is something of an expert at action thrillers. He's the man who made Code of Silence, which is still the best of all of Chuck Norris's pictures. And he does a confident job this time of showcasing Steven Seagal, who is tall, dark, handsome, and very impressive when he personally throws his victims around in hand-to-hand combat. This guy spent about 10 years as a karate instructor and, as it says in the press release, bodyguard to heads of state before making this movie. The movie is not just a simple thriller, though. It involves not only drug smuggling, but also Central American refugees, police department politics, and Seagal's home life as a happily married father whose family is in great danger. The movie has perhaps 50% too much plot, but it's slick, exciting, and ambitious, and I did like the way it used so many offbeat character actors to create a level of realism underneath that fantasy character played by Steven Seagal.
Yeah, well, he didn't turn me on particularly because he is so heroic, it's almost like he's riding around on an invisible giant horse above the crowd. I mean, you know, they talk about Clint Eastwood. One of the great things about Clint Eastwood is he doesn't give off or know how cool he is when he's in his pictures. He's just plunging ahead doing his job. The way this movie has been structured to feature this guy, he's aware, everyone's aware that he's somebody special. And I didn't like that. In addition, I think there's another thing that you hit on that I didn't like, and that is when you said 50% too much plot. I mean, they've got everything thrown in here. The stuff that did interest me is this film makes a lot of accusations about the CIA and drug smuggling. If they had just winnowed the plot down to that aspect, I think it could have been a sharp little thriller.
Well, it's an ambitious movie, but I want to go back to what you said about Steven Seagal, because I agree with you that they treat him like he's somebody special.
Right.
But I don't agree with you that Clint Eastwood didn't do that, especially at the beginning. If you go back to A Fistful of Dollars, and for a few dollars more, he's playing this super character, this mythical character who strides on a different plane than ordinary men, and I think they're deliberately doing the same thing here with this character. Later on, there's time to let him play a funkier person like Dirty Harry, but right now he's got to be this kind of larger-than-life person, and I think it works as an introduction in a self-conscious attempt to manufacture a movie star, which is what they're trying to do.
No, I don't know. To me, I was much more aware of it this time than I was with Eastwood. Coming up next, the movie Bad Dreams, about a young woman who survives a death cult, wakes up from a long coma, only to find that her nightmare is not over.
Cynthia, what happened?
He's alive. He's in there.
Who's in there?
This is a disgusting little horror picture appropriately called Bad Dreams, about a girl involved in a Jim Jones-like hippie cult where the sleazy leader pours gasoline on his flock and sets them all aflame right at the beginning of the picture.
Come to eternal bliss.
One girl survives from the carnage, and years later she awakes from a coma and finds herself part of a heavily medicated therapy group full of nuts.
You know what I do when it all gets to be too much? I make a little hole, and it all escapes.
That's kind of revolting. If you care where this movie is going, and by this time I didn't, it gets worse. The heroine has recurring visions of the supposedly dead guru now stalking her fellow patients. I had sort of thought this kind of mad killer movie had moved on, but Bad Dreams carries on the dubious tradition, and rather poorly, I'm afraid. I'm tired of seeing the facially scarred Richard Lynch cast in yet another monster role. I wish they'd give him something else to do. And Jennifer Rubin as Cynthia appears to have some charisma, but she certainly isn't given much of a chance to show it. A pretty bad film.
I think you picked the right word when you said it was disgusting. This movie is even worse than disgusting. It's despicable, because what it does is it takes the genre of the dead teenager movie,
Yes.
and forget about the R rating. Everybody in Hollywood, if they're honest, will tell you this movie is aimed at high school kids and junior high school kids. And what does it do? In the usual dead teenager movie, some horrible monster is hacking up the teenagers.
Right.
This one is even worse. These kids are driven to commit suicide. Haven't the people who made this movie ever heard about the national epidemic of teenage suicide? Do they think this is entertainment? What were they thinking of when they made this movie?
Money.
It's not only despicable, of course they were thinking of money, it's irresponsible.
Well, I mean, the picture, the only thing that I'm worried about with your tirade just right now is that you might get somebody aroused enough to see the picture. So I'm going to take the tension down a few seconds and say that it's a very bad film. It is a boring film. In other words, it's stupid.
It isn't. It's not boring, Gene. The scene at the end where she's hanging off the building,
come on,
stabbing her hand with a needle.
Oh, yes. It's boring to me because it's tired kind of thing. When people hang off buildings, I get tired of it. And when they get something stuck in their hand, I want to vomit.
Okay, well, I think that's a good reaction to this movie.
Yeah.
When we come back, we both like colors earlier in the program, so let's take another look at Sean Penn, who's developed a troublesome public image, but his movies prove he's one of the best actors of his generation.
I'm not stupid, Chris. I read books.
What are you talking about?
I know what it's called, disinformation, counter-espionage.
Even if you never go to the movies, you may know who Sean Penn is anyway because of all the publicity he's gotten for his marriage to the rock superstar Madonna, and also because of all the scuffles and controversies that he seems to attract to himself almost magnetically. I've even heard a few commentators lately who simply referred to Penn in passing as a typical example of bad manners or uncivilized behavior. Well, my personal opinion is that Sean Penn's manners are no worse than the average person's, but he's become the target and victim of photographers who will do almost anything to make him angry. And unfortunately, that process may obscure the fact that Penn has created some of the best performances of recent years in the movies. Earlier in the show, we reviewed his new movie, Colors, and if you go to your video store, you'll find 3 other fine performances there. One of them is Bad Boys from 1983 with Penn as a Chicago street kid who ends up in a reformatory. Look at the tenderness here in this scene with Ali Sheedy. And in The Falcon and the Snowman, a 1985 film based on a true case history, he disappeared so completely into character that you can hardly recognize him here as Timothy Hutton's buddy, a stoned-out kid who starts selling secrets to the Russians.
I Xeroxed everything! Every cipher, every document. They're out. Make you nervous? Well, don't worry, Chris. I'm not going to do anything with them as long as you're reasonable. Oh, you don't believe me? All right, go ahead. Go. That's the quickest way to find out. Go on.
Where are they?
In a safe place.
Where?
In a safe place.
And here's Sean Penn in the great 1986 film At Close Range. Christopher Walken plays his father, a professional criminal who wants to bully his son into doing whatever he tells him to do.
Terry and I are getting out of here.
Where are you going to go? What are you going to do when you get where you go?
I got some ideas.
How are you going to pay? Apartment, food, clothes, all that.
I'll find something.
You find all you know is how to steal. You're too dumb to do that by yourself.
Oh, you think so?
I don't know much about Sean Penn's private life, and frankly, I couldn't care less. All I know is that in movie after movie, he amazes me with the depth and power of his performances. Hollywood legend is filled with the stories of great talents who have self-destructed, but I don't see Penn as the self-destructive type. I think that right now, he's simply in the middle of a lot of bad publicity which feeds on itself. And if you look at his movies and not at his publicity, you'll get a very different picture.
I think this is worth saying, too, because I hate to see a very talented young actor when we have so many other actors who you know, make huge amounts of money and get to star repeatedly in films of no consequence that portray young people as dolts, as stupid little machines running around trying to have sex with an older woman or succeeding in some stupid business enterprise. Here is Sean Penn, who takes on characters of fascination regardless of their age. These are actually ageless characters that are playing. They're that good. And he, as you say, does disappear into character. He does take on challenging assignments. He is willing, like all the great actors, to play unlikable characters rather than lover boys. And I just hate to see this whole other stuff of his life, a lot of which I think is instigated by people trying to make a buck off of a cheap photograph, ruin his career.
I agree with you. You know, the problem, one of the problems is that his biggest hit was Fast Time at Ridgemont High.
Yeah.
The three pictures I just mentioned, Bad Boys, At Close Range, and Falcon and the Snowman,
are all better.
Were, well, much better.
Right.
But they were not box office hits, so a lot of people are not familiar, really, with the range of his talent.
Yeah,
so
well,
that's what video is good for.
You got it. Now let's recap the movies we reviewed on this show. 2 thumbs up for the impressive Cops and Gangs picture, Colors, which reveals the inner workings of both groups. 2 thumbs down, however, for 18 Again, the limp comedy starring just a little bit of George Burns. We split on the thriller Above the Law with Steven Seagal. Roger found him impressive? I did not. And 2 thumbs down, way down, for Bad Dreams, the disgusting mental hospital thriller. So Colors is the picture that we recommend.
That's right, and that's it for this week. Next week we'll review 5 new films, including the World War II.
Did you sleep with her?